There's a moment every cop remembers when policy, politics, and reality all collide in the same room. For me, it happened during a briefing at my department years ago. At the time, law enforcement agencies everywhere were being accused of racial profiling during traffic stops. It wasn't just our department. It was the national conversation. Every week it felt like another headline, another accusation, another talking head on TV saying cops only stop black drivers. And maybe there were agencies out there with real problems that needed fixing, but in our department, nobody had any actual data, just assumptions, allegations, feelings. The narrative was already written before anyone looked at a single number. So eventually the order came down from above. From now on, officers were required to document the race of every driver they stopped. Now, on paper, maybe that sounded reasonable. Gather data, track trends, build transparency. Fine. Except there was one small problem. In the state of Indiana, race isn't listed on the driver's license. Naturally, one of the officers raised his hand and asked the obvious question. How exactly are we supposed to determine someone's race? And the bosses immediately said, well, you absolutely cannot ask them. That would be racist. The room got quiet for a second because every cop in there immediately realized the problem. If you can't ask, then what exactly are you supposed to do? And that's when an old veteran officer sitting in the back of the room finally spoke up. Dead serious. Perfect timing. He said, yeah, and just guessing ain't racist at all. And the whole room lost it. But underneath the laughter was something important, because that moment perfectly captured one of the biggest problems in modern policing reform. People love demanding solutions right up until those solutions collide with reality. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Not slogans, not headlines, reality. It's time to start telling our own stories. I'm Steve Kellums, and welcome to Blue Canary. When I decided to talk about police reform, I immediately thought of Brad Seifers. I had the pleasure of working extensively with Brad over the years and knew that if anyone had a solid thought on police reform, it would be Brad. Brad recently retired from law enforcement after a 32-year career. He started at the Indiana University Police Academy in 1994, then spent over 22 years in municipal policing. He served in every role from patrol officer to lieutenant of patrol and detectives. He then made the transition back to higher education policing by rejoining the IUPD as lieutenant. Brad eventually moved up in the ranks to become the deputy superintendent of IUPD, which is the position he retired from in January of 2026. Brad also spent 29 years serving the U.S. Army, retiring with the rank of Command Sergeant Major. That career was predominantly in military policing. He also holds a BA in criminal justice and a Master's of Science in performance improvement. Brad was gracious enough to give us some time. Brad, thanks so much for coming on and talking with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. It's been a while since we've had a chat of this nature. I look forward to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we used to spend a lot of time sitting over coffee talking about how to solve all the world's problems. So this is going to seem like old times, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was excited when you reached out to be able to have one of these chats again.
So before we get too far into it, could you take a few minutes and just give our listeners just a brief background? Because you've done a lot of stuff in law enforcement and in the military. So why don't you lay that out for us?
Yeah, just briefly, I spent 29 years in the United States Army, retired as Command Sergeant Major. That was coming on 5 years ago. Then I've also completed 32 years in civilian law enforcement, starting at Indiana University at the IU Police Academy, then the city of Marion in northern Indiana, back to the city of Bloomington, where I was born and raised. Retired from municipal policing and went back to IU and eventually took the role as Deputy Superintendent for Public Safety for the 9 campuses for IUPD.
So that's had you, at the street level, you did a lot of work there at the street level, all the way up to a high level administration, not just for a local municipal department, but also for a state agency. So you've had your hands in a wide variety of policing. And when I reached out to you, the reason I thought you'd be perfect for, this episode or this season is I want to talk about police reform, and not just the reform that we're seeing from the politicians, not the reform we're wanting to see from the public, those two groups that have no idea what it actually means to do this job. I thought it would be great for you to kind of come on, set a foundation for that and talk about things. So I'm going to open up with a really broad question for you. What should we be doing in police reform?
Well, that's a great question. And one thing I forgot to add is I'm still an adjunct professor for Indiana University, and the class that I teach every spring that just wrapped up this week is it's called Police Community Relations, but it's all about reform. Where was policing? Where is it now? And where do I and my classmates think it needs to go? So the primary thing, I did a roundtable with IU students probably 2 years ago, and we went through there were several professors there talking about what's going on in policing, and one of the students, we got the question and answer, they stood up and said, "What's the first thing you would do?" And I said, "Quit sending police officers to things they're not good at, things that they're not trained and experts at." That right off the bat will reduce conflict between the police and the community. Alternative response to things that police aren't good at. And it's not that the police aren't well trained, they're just not well trained in some areas. Think about the experience with homelessness and substance abuse, mental illness. People spend half of a career learning that area, and we can't teach police officers to be the experts. That was the primary start of what would I do if I got to be in charge for a day. The second thing, if you think your car's not running right, you don't take money away from the car, you put money into the car to fix it. And if we believe that policing is flawed, which it is, I think Steve and I would both agree it's flawed in areas, we should be putting money to fixing it, not just throwing more police officers at a crime problem. I don't know in American history we've ever arrested ourselves out of a problem. So throwing more cops at crime, not necessarily going to solve our problem. So that's kind of the pinnacle of what I talk about, and I'm happy to get into more details and what I think the steps involve to have some true reform.
I think those are both very interesting points and the kind of points that we can dive into a little bit. I want to start with that first one about stop sending cops to things that they're not trained in and they're not good at. Fundamentally, I believe exactly what you're saying, but we're seeing that approach from the defund and anti-police movements to eliminate law enforcement officers by hiring all of these other groups to do these things, which at its core doesn't seem like a bad idea. But I've always said that I believe things like, social workers and law enforcement, a phenomenal idea in conjunction with cops, not in replacement of. And it seems like the anti-police movement uses that same talking point, but their idea is to cut the police staffing in half from what it currently is, which is already half of what it should be, and then add other people. What's your response to that?
I agree with you completely. It has to be an alternative and not a replacement. It has to supplement law enforcement and public safety, not supplant it. Denver is a great example. They moved some budget money to create what's called a STAR program, where they have a van with mental health experts who are now responding to calls that are primarily substance abuse, mental illness, things of that nature. I think at last they've gone over 1,200 incidents and maybe 2 arrests. Whereas when you send police officers to solve the problem, we typically have to put somebody in a jail because we no longer have mental health institutions or substance abuse institutions. For their safety, we wind up putting them in jail, which basically we criminalize mental illness that way. We make homelessness against the law. We make mental illness against the law because they wind up in jail. Probably not the proper avenue. I don't agree with taking money away from what public safety needs to do and law enforcement specifically. You have to get creative budget-wise and create the alternative response. Now they've There's been some change. LA recently started a program as well. There are a few across big cities across the country. Some of them are a co-response. There's a police officer dressed in a softer uniform. You and I have had experience with that with the downtown resource officer program, where they don't wear the typical uniform of authority, right? They're in a pair of soft pants and a polo to be more, maybe softer, more approachable. The police officer's in the car in case something happens and they need that response, but it's happened very rarely in the programs that are doing it around the country.
Yeah, and those seem to be fairly effective as we start looking at issues of recidivism. But, again, those are specific programs where cops have been taught to go out and deal specifically with mental health issues and, with the homeless issues that, as you've said, are different and don't necessarily need to be criminalized. We've said this before. I've said, you can't arrest your way out of the problem. That's because we can't arrest our way out of the social problems. We can't arrest our way out of the criminal problems. And I think sometimes these anti-police movements, when they talk about police reform, again, this is a topic that I find them latch onto, but they take it that extra step, which causes problems of let's not put actual criminals in jail. And instead everybody gets to walk. Well, armed robbers need to be in jail. Right. I mean, those people need to be in jail. Like you said, the people that aren't committing crimes but have nowhere to go because they're either chronically homeless or mentally ill, we shouldn't be locking those people up, yet we have no options because the mental health is such a problem in the U.S. today.
Absolutely. I have talked about in my class all the time. There are people who don't deserve to live among us. Right there, we need.
I love that statement. Right? Thank you for saying that. Thank you. That's the kind of stuff we got to hear.
Right. There's people that should be in jail, but I reduce. When we put somebody in jail, when I talk to my students, you essentially are putting somebody in a cage. Why are you putting a drug addict in a cage? That's not going to solve the drug addict's problem, minus any other behavior. Right. What's the alternative? Now, I always say to my class, I don't know if it's the right way, but it's a way. Oregon tried Measure 110, where they decriminalized all personal possession of narcotics, all cocaine, heroin, all, right? And the idea was police officers would write a ticket. If the person who was caught with the narcotic went to treatment, the ticket would be dismissed. Well, the fine was $100. It wasn't enough to change behavior, right? Addicts are not going to change their behavior because they're going to save $100, right? You and I both know from our experience, they go absolutely broke and steal money to feed the habit. They're not going to go save $100. So, and then I was with an executive from Oregon, from the city of Portland, and I said, hey, we were about a year into it. And I said, how's Measure 110 working out? And he said, it's a complete disaster, because what they did was they decriminalized all the possession of narcotics, but they did not have the safety net set up, the alternative response for those folks in counseling and inpatient care. There was no place for them to go. We had the idea, right? We've talked about lawmakers make laws without involving all the stakeholders. This was a perfect example. They passed 110, and the police are like, what am I supposed to do with these folks now, right? And there were no facilities for them to immediately go to. And I think only a couple actually followed through. 9 months into the program, because it went into effect in February of that year, drug contacts with the police dropped from 1,200 a day to 200 a day. So the cops are like, if it's not a crime, I'm not involved anymore, right? I'll go find crime to put people in jail. It goes to one of my primary tenets of teaching police reform is you're either a guardian or a warrior. That's a warrior mindset. I'm just out here to put people in jail. If that's not a crime anymore, I'll go find a crime. As opposed to a guardian mindset, which is the alternatives I can lead people to. Maybe they get help, maybe they don't, but at least you give them the option. And that guardian warrior, you're not one or the other all the time. My chief at the IU Northwest campus, Monte Davis, during one of our think tank sessions as executives, he used a Superman analogy. And he said, we need to teach our young police officers, look, we don't need Superman all the time. 95% of the time, I need Clark Kent. We will train you, equip you, and have you prepared to be Superman. I just don't need that all the time. And I thought that was a great analogy of how we should be training young police officers, that you're the guardian of the community more than the warrior out there fighting the community.
I like that too. I think that's well said. I know that I teach in my classes and I talk a lot about the concepts of the warrior mindset and how we're not warriors, and the guardian mindset, who I talk about that not even being clear as to what the intent is of that, all because we don't want to train what we are, which is cops, which is something kind of different, right? A group of individuals that's never really existed on this planet before. I mean, we're brand new to civilization, a group of people organized for the common good of society that have to, when necessary, be warriors, when necessary, be guardians, and when necessary, get down and put a sticker on a kid's shirt at the county fair, because cops do all of those things. And I think we need to focus more on that. Do you think this issue is a training problem, a culture problem, or a politics problem?
I think it's a culture problem. I'll give you a couple of examples. Rochester, New York, 2 adult police officers pepper spray a 9-year-old girl who's handcuffed because she won't get in the car. I think it was also in New York, it was in Maine. A school teacher is having something of a mental crisis. He's not himself. He gets pulled over. For some reason, the police officers ordered him out of the car to get on the ground. He's on his knees with his hands up, right? We can tell he's not armed, but because he won't lay flat on the ground, the officer deploys a dog and bites the elementary school teacher. The next day, the chief is on the news going, "Oh, that's absolutely appropriate." Well, that's a culture problem. There's no reason for that, right? If you can't recognize that someone's having a crisis and calm down, slow down, you're not in immediate danger and no one else is, there has to be another explanation for this. And in that, another response that doesn't involve the police using force. And I can get into perf stats, a police executive research forum. I'm an absolute study rat with them. I read everything they publish. I've been to conferences. I went to one of their executive trainings. It was almost 3 weeks in Boston. Their mantra in policing is, look, we're going to use force. It's inevitable in our line of work. Just don't be the reason that we used force. Don't be the person who rushed in, cornered somebody, gave them no options, put yourself in peril, which we know the Supreme Court is now ruling that's not justifiable force anymore. If you create the peril by throwing yourself in front of a car or something else. But their whole thing is, don't be the reason we used force. When you can, slow down, gain time and distance, seek an alternative resolution, make sure that force is the absolute last resort. I agree with that completely. But Steve, that's a lot of training and changing a lot of culture in our profession. And the battleship turns really slow, as we know.
Well, that was my next question, is that if it is a culture problem, what do we do? How do we address that? How do we fix the culture problem if that's where we're at?
Yeah, that's kind of like $1 million question. One, a lot of police executives need to go do something else. If you can,
right, you and I agree completely on that.
If you can get in front of the media the next day and say that sending a dog to bite an elementary school teacher, and I think the entire interaction, Steve, was like 19 seconds. So go back to the basis, the true basis of policing, right? Police officers.
But we would say, I would argue, we see that the other way too, right? When we have some use of force and we have police executives going on, the next day and saying that this is absolutely horrific without even reviewing everything or being able to see the exact outcomes. That's just as bad, right?
Oh, I agree. Every situation deserves the clarity, right, of time,
yes,
and research. Where we get into problems anywhere in society, but especially what we're talking about today in law enforcement, is the emotional response. Remove the emotion from it, right, and just look at the facts and take your time to get the facts. And you're right, some police executives are just as guilty as the media to jump to conclusions and say things that just turn out not to be correct. And that's, if we're going to change the culture, we've got to have new leadership. But we promote from within. If that chief, deputy chief, captains are promoting that culture down through their ranks, that next leader's not in that group. I say to my class, I don't know what the true right answer is right now. But a lot of it has to do with how do we train this generation of police officers? Are we training them to be professionals? Are we training them to be cops? There's a difference, right? Are we training them to be problem solvers and thinkers and right instead of I'm just a blunt force instrument that's got to go solve the next problem, right? And can we get them to slow down? You and I know from our experience at our last agency, there were days we were buried all day. Um, and so when we make mistakes in this profession is when we get tired, we get frustrated, and we get in a hurry. And when you're constantly under the pressure of you can't catch up to all the calls on the screen, you get tired, you get frustrated, and we get in a hurry. And that's when we jump into force or jump into a decision that doesn't work out very well because we didn't take time. If we can find the alternative response to some of the community problems that police officers are not good at, the police officers would have more time to slow down on the incidents that they are on.
So again, it goes back to having a nice balance within community responses, it sounds like, with one of the first tenets you put out is having enough police officers to deal with the crime out there, which we don't have right now. And then on top of that, having extra resources within the community to deal with those things that the police officers are not good at or do not have the opportunity to train in, like mental health or homeless response, and having those extra groups. So that sounds like that's something you'd like to strive for. That's where you'd like to be, is having this holistic approach.
It is definitely multi-pronged. There's not one silver bullet to solve police reform. Um, you have to have several things. So think about the response to the pandemic. We used the Swiss cheese example, right? One thing, we get vaccinated is a layer, then you wear masks, you keep your distance, and you layer all these things on, and finally you have some level of effect. Reforming police is exactly the same thing. We have to have alternative responses, which means we have to have some tough decisions in communities about where do we put our limited funds. We have to have better trained police officers um, that think, right. That's going to take a long time. There's 18,000 agencies and now over 500,000 police officers in this country. And I tell my class, the guy that got on the news and said it was okay for his dog to bite the elementary school teacher, I said, well, now I'm down to 17,999 chiefs I have to change because I'm not changing that guy, right? He's just told me
Right.
he's not open to reform. I need to go find the other 17,999 and see if I can get them to change. And there is a profound need, right? Police Executive Research Forum published stats on use of force. 40% of the police action shootings in the United States involve someone who's not armed or armed with a knife. Or they're armed or armed, not they're unarmed or armed with something other than a firearm. 40%. That has to change. That's something we can affect, right? As police executives and leaders in this profession, we can change that number if we train people properly.
Now, here's a question that I struggle with a lot, and I don't know the answer, and I don't think you know the answer either, but I'm going to throw it out there. We'll see if this conversation can lead us somewhere. I am a massive fan of decentralized law enforcement. I do not believe in a national police force. I believe in local police forces. I believe in having communities have the police that they want and the police that serve those communities. So how do you get these, 18,000 police agencies across the United States? How do you get them to start working to meet some standards without taking away their own ability to provide the enforcement and the protection within the communities that they serve, instead of being a national version of police, which I think would be a terrible idea, but I don't know how to solve this problem.
Well, I don't know that I have the answer either, but as I talk through it, I agree with you. The national government has not solved the problem for us yet. I don't expect them to solve policing, um, and I agree it should be local. At the very least, at the state level, you have some parameters, and at the local level, um, every community wants to be policed differently. And I think as much as we can, we should police that community the way it wants to be policed, right? They don't get to have the total say, but we get feedback from the community about what's important to you, and we focus on those things. So we already kind of went back and forth on accreditation a little bit. I do firmly believe in a national accreditation that every agency in the United States should be accredited. And my proposal would be, instead of throwing grant money to hire more police officers, grant money at accreditation and mandate that every agency in America become accredited, and the government should pay for it, provide the funds, because it is expensive.
It is expensive.
It is.
That was going to be my argument with you, was that.
It's,
so, but
yeah,
a funded mandate.
Absolutely. For the price that you could hire 2 police officers, you could get your agency accredited by an unbiased third party, whoever that is. In the world of higher ed, we use IUPD, International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators, because they accredit armed and unarmed public safety on campuses. Our experience with them, Indiana University became not only the largest institution to become accredited, but the first multi-campus system to be accredited through IUPD. They usually want to go campus by campus. We met with them several times, went over several proposals. Indiana University is the only organization that has multi-campus accreditation. Now, what that does is 218 standards. You write the standards, everybody reads them and attests to them. Then you collect the proofs that you're doing what you said you were going to do. And every 4 years, the organization comes back and does the audit to reaccredit it. At least you can tell the community you are now using research-based policies and procedures and tactics that are up to date and current.
Now, right? Where are those coming from, Brad? Those policies, those procedures, those tactics, those standards. Who's deciding that? Where's that coming from?
So for IUPD, they have a governing board, but then they have numerous conferences throughout the year where the stakeholders get that say. Like the accreditation board will say, hey, we're thinking about changing this standard or adding this standard. They don't do it unilaterally. The membership gets to have a say on, hey, how's that going to impact our local accreditation? Because it may sound like a good idea. We'll use the state of Indiana in a minute for what they thought was a good idea. It turns out to be not a good idea.
Right.
The police executives that are a part of IUPD have input on what direction we're going. And that's hard, right? There's a lot of Institute of Higher Ed trying to get policies that match everything. IUPD is generally more, their statements are more general than some other accreditation agencies. So it allows for some movement under it, left and right, to be implemented locally and still meet the goal of having research-based, up-to-date policies.
Now, I've had a lot of experience with CALEA, mixed feelings about that. We've talked about that in the past. But I thought one of the very interesting things is, I think we're talking about Phoenix Police Department here. They're CALEA accredited, which means that they're the top 3%. They've gone through the accreditation process. And then lo and behold, the Department of Justice turns right around and says they have policies and practices that violate civil rights. How can both things be true? And where does the Department of Justice play into this? Because, again, not a big fan of them either, but I'm curious of your opinions here.
Yes, I think it's misplaced. If you get accredited, CALEA does not have policies that violate the Justice Department guidelines, or they wouldn't exist. Sometimes I think that organizations have to justify their existence, so they have to go look for a problem that doesn't necessarily exist.
It's a very political way to state that.
Well, very good. I mean, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Oakland probably needed some oversight. Phoenix did need some oversight. They had Phoenix at one time had the most police action shootings of any city in the country, if you can believe that. And what happened was they spent $150,000 and brought in the National Police Foundation to do a study on what's going on. The result of that study was, we're going to have police officers document every time they point their weapon at someone. Shootings went down 70%. That tells me we had police officers with their guns out of their holsters. A lot of times they didn't need to be out of their holsters, right? If simply saying you're going to do a report when you point your firearm and shootings go down 70%, hey, good for them. Money well spent, right? $150,000 just dropped your offer involved shootings by 70%. But again, go back to, I don't know where the Justice Department has grounds to come in and say if Phoenix has policies that are violating the Justice Department, so is everybody.
So the we've focused on this, which actually I'm really happy for. This has been a fantastic conversation. And as we kind of come to the end of this, I'm curious because I know you had a list of stuff. As a matter of fact, I know that you and I could probably talk for a day about this and not even scratch the surface. It's what we did over coffee time often. What else? Let me kind of, as we wrap this up, I'm looking for, I don't know, a final statement. Maybe if there's another topic that you really wanted to talk about that we didn't get into, or if you want to kind of put a capper on some of the stuff we've already talked about. What are some final things that you might want to bring to this conversation for the listeners?
Yeah, so what I found a little surprising in my research is when we talk about the PERS program ICAT, which integrating communication assessment tactics, which is basically teaching us to slow down, gain time and distance, don't be the reason we use force. All these things we're going to do to, get rid of the chokehold, which you and I chatted about by email. No knock warrants. You and I could spend a day talking about no knock warrants. And everybody, you heard this thing about officer safety. Officer safety, it is the anchor we've held on to for decades about why we never changed anything. We're going to put the officers in danger. Here's just a few things, Steve, to wrap up. 60% of police officers support ending no knock warrants. It puts them in danger. I did both. I vouch for that. No knock warrants were not fun. 68% of police officers support getting rid of the chokehold and the vascular neck restraint because the vascular neck restraint looks like a chokehold to the public. And most police officers are like, yeah, that picture in the paper is not going to look good. I will use it if deadly force is authorized, but not until. And then 57% of police officers believe that there should be some adjustments to qualified immunity, that you should not just get to behave any way you want and have that umbrella. Again, at least a day's topic. But let me defeat the officer safety argument for a minute when you implement ICAT and you slow down and take time and distance and find alternative response. The University of Cincinnati went to Louisville PD after they implemented PERS ICAT program. And the police officer like, you're going to get us hurt and put us in danger. University of Cincinnati stats at the conclusion, 28.1% reduction in the use of force incidents. They had a 26.3% reduction in citizens they injured, and a full 36% reduction in officer injuries. So we didn't put the officers in danger. We actually kept them from getting hurt and hurting other people by implementing the de-escalation, slow down, time, distance when you can. We all understand that we go from 0 to 100 sometimes. That's what happens sometimes in our community. But most of the time, implementing de-escalation and slowing down and find alternative solutions not only keeps the public safer, it keeps the police officer safer.
I think it's really interesting. And this conversation has been fantastic because of the fact that much of what you're saying, we also hear by the defund police movement and the anti-police movements, except that they take it that extra step or they couch it in different things. For example, time, distance, and taking your time, getting your distance are really important when we're talking about officer safety and de-escalation, right? But that term de-escalation gets used by the politicians over the time to think that you can't lay hands on anybody. You can't actually do this stuff. And that causes confusion and frustration amongst officers, right? Because when the fight's on, the fight's on. You've got to do those things to survive, to do your job, to protect other people. But when the fight's not on yet, you should be doing everything you can, as you said, and I think you said it perfectly, not be the cause of the violence. But when you have to be the solution to the violence, you have to do that. And that's a great conversation to have. But too many of the politicians, whenever they create these reforms, write it up, point it out, and push training in a manner that just absolutely confuses officers.
It does. And I've had young officers ask me, even in the field, what should we be doing, things of that nature. So it's going to take a while to train, because we train young police officers. They go to other agencies. They're trained by FTOs who may have 20 years experience and haven't heard the word de-escalation yet. So that young officer sometimes is conflicted. But when you talk about defund, and something that was really frustrating to me as a police executive and a researcher, even in Minneapolis, when they started pulling funds from the Minneapolis Police Department, the research showed that among black voters, 75% were not in favor of a referendum to change the size of the police force. So you didn't talk to the community. But what people talked about, and they're talking about defund the police, well, defund the violence, right? But fund training and education, and make them a better profession, I think is what they were saying. The politicians, again, emotional reaction. Well, we'll just pull millions of dollars from them. Yay. No. Then crime went through the roof. And Steve, really, after George Floyd, we lost a perfect time to have a true discussion about reform and see some good measurable differences. But the political groups pulled all the funding, millions upon millions. Crime went crazy. Fentanyl deaths went crazy. And we lost the narrative about how we're going to change the profession. And we just jammed more cops and more millions of dollars back into what we took away. And we're nowhere closer to having a nationwide reform effort.
Yeah, and I think you said it perfect at the beginning. When your car's broke, you put money in it to fix it. And we've done the exact opposite in policing. Policing's broke, at least parts of policing are broken. And instead of putting money in it to fix it, we've just decided to take all the money out of it and hope that it gets better on its own. That's the most ridiculous response ever.
I agree with you. And I'm going to wrap up with you, Steve, to say I don't want to be just the person who pokes at the profession. I'm highly critical of our profession. You only get better when you think you need to get better. I think we need to get better. And I did it for 32 years, but that's not all. My dad did it for 45 and a half years. I am not poking at the profession to be mean and challenging us. I just want us to get better.
Yeah, well said. Brad, thanks so much for taking the time to come on and talk to me. I really, really appreciate it. And we're going to have to stay in touch. We're going to have to go out and actually get a physical cup of coffee soon.
I would do that. Absolutely. And again, I appreciate you having me on to talk about something that I have a true passion for. And I just changing the way we do police work. That's my goal now that I'm out of the job. My goal is to change how we do the job.
And that's the story we have to tell. Thank you for joining. As always, I'm curious what questions you're getting asked. What isn't the news covering? What story needs to be told? Connect with me at bluecanarypodcast@gmail.com.
The Legal Liability Risk Management Institute is the nation's largest provider of liability and risk management services in the United States. Our goal is to help reduce liability, reduce lawsuits, and enhance officer performance. Regardless of the size of your agency, we have a risk management solution. You may contact us at www.llrmi.com or call 317-386-8325.